Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. My name is Richard, and welcome to Absolem Solutions. So today I'd like to talk about learning styles for effective teaching and presentation. And I talk about this because it's really important that your presentation and your teaching style takes into account these learning styles from your audience, because that's going to make your presentation and teaching more effective. Now, we've talked a lot about establishing patterns, about neural synaptic pathways, and how we channel that groove. So we're tying that all back in. But this is more about your audience. So this subject is always evolving. So when I first learned about it way back in the late 80s, it wasn't quite the same as it is now. At the time, there was only 3 learning styles. Now we're up to 7. But let's jump into that and see how that goes. In the late 80s, there were only 3 learning styles. They were visual, audio, and kinesthetic. I learn by seeing, I learn by hearing, and I learn by doing, hands-on. Hands-on people are not just about getting hands-on. These are people who are perhaps not spectacular when you give them a series of 30 math problems, but you give them a dance routine to learn, oh, they'll learn that in a minute, much faster than others. Now, it's also important to note that nobody is purely on one axis. Nobody is purely kinesthetic, although there are some people who are much, much higher on that range. This is a spectrum, and it goes on a matrix. So we're talking about a matrix of 3 at the moment. Around 2000, they kind of looked at this and said, well, wait a minute. There are also spatial learners. There are people who think in terms of spatial alignment. And there are people who think in terms of abstract. An audio learner can hear a math problem and could reason it out, but if it was just 7 times 3, it was too abstract. It didn't give us anything. Now, there's a fantastic TED Talk, by the way, on how to make math more accessible by turning math into language, because math is a language. But just the idea of adding 7 times 3, or 7 apples 3 times, makes it a lot easier to picture 21 apples, right? So it makes the problem visual, which means that visual learners learn it a lot more easily. Those 2. And now we come to current or modern standard. That way, visual and spatial have been merged into one. So now we talk about visual, spatial. People who are visual tend to have good spatial reasoning. That's not necessarily a given, but it's common enough that they do fit well together. So that is now visual, spatial. Audio broke into 2 branches. You will have your oral, musical people who think in terms of sound, but not necessarily language. The other audio track is verbal and linguistic. So that goes together. These are people who hear it, and the language makes sense to them in a big way. We still have physical / kinesthetic. Our kinesthetic learners are still there. And now what used to be called abstract is referred to as logical or mathematical thinking. These are people who understand a spreadsheet without necessarily needing a graph. They can look at these numbers and understand the story or the narrative of the data, or the multiple narratives of the data. And last but not least, we have two they're not competing by any far stretch. Social learners and solitary learners. Some people learn better on their own. They'll grab a book, they'll go and sit in the corner, and they will learn very quickly. So that would be somebody who is visual and linguistic and a little more solitary. Other people learn very, very well socially, and that's fine. Again, this is still a spectrum over a matrix, but we now have 7 points rather than just the 5. And somebody can be both social and solitary. They can learn equally well in both, whereas other people may not learn very well just on their own. Where that becomes most important is when you're creating your curriculum. I want you to consider, or even when you're communicating in general, consider the idea that I might use visual language. I wouldn't give you directions in terms of settings and speeds and distances. Well, I could. And a mathematical logical person might take that and go, yes, that makes perfect sense, and run with it. But they'd have to be very, very much oriented towards that. I would most likely give you landmarks and say you may see a park, and a park has sounds associated with it, so it would be easy to kind of remember that. Or perhaps a construction zone, which would be something to see and hear. Take a right, and there's a lot of potholes on that particular street. Again, that could speak to the audio of a car going through potholes, the visual of it, the kinesthetic, the feeling of it, and it would also appeal to the spatial reasoning and landmarks, anything like that. The more information I can give you, instead of just giving you north, south, headings, distances, the more I can give you that you can incorporate that makes the most sense to you is going to change the narrative. It's going to change how you receive the information, because it's going to be, again, less mental process for you, and it will be more natural to have that come in as high level. So that is how you keep training high level, or keep your communication high level, by adapting what you want to convey in a way that is more open to multiple learning styles, and making that available to the person you want to impart that to. So what are some resources? Well, some great references for this would be TED Talks. TED Talks are fantastic. They give you some really, really good examples to build from. So I want you to take a look at TED Talks. The reason I specify TED Talks, and it could be other interviews and whatnot, but they have to be recent, because these learning styles have only become a really big thing in the past, say, 15 years, 20 years. So you want to focus on more modern speeches to get examples of how you can use this in your presentations, your delivery, your speech, your communication. The other thing I'm going to lead you to are things like neuro-linguistic processing, things like Richard Bandler's work, Tommy Huber. There's a whole lot of neuro-linguistic programming stuff out there, and that deals really with language and how that language infers what you want to put out. It really, really very successfully gives you the opportunity to say things how you want to say them, and I do this quite a bit. Hypnosis as well. People like Igor Lidichevsky or Jamie Smart have great light induction, which is a variation or a quicker version where it's not sit on a couch, watch a pendulum. These are much, much quicker, and they also teach you some great tips about reading body language and understanding what's happening while you're conversing with somebody. there's no denying that if you're going to be a presenter and if you're going to be working with people, this is some great skill set to have just to be able to read properly. And it's fantastic. So I highly encourage you for that. Thanks for watching. I hope you hit the subscribe button and maybe the little bell to let you know every Friday when we bring out our video, so you can see the latest. You can see our latest, and I hope you've enjoyed. Again, if you like what you heard and you want to know more, please feel free to reach out. We love communicating with you guys, and we'd love to communicate more. So we're accessible, we're available, we're there for you. And check out the website absolem.io. There's a chat feature on there if you really want to just get straight through to one of us. And please, thanks very much for watching. My name is Richard, and I hope you have a great time. Until next time.